Good to see everybody. I'm Jacquie Benestante. Thank you so much for sharing your lunchtime with us. I'm here with Monica Diaz and Joe Carr, and we're presenting on autism, burnout, and prevention and recovery. So they both have a lot of great information to share. And let's see. Let me see if I can forward the. There we go. So I'll introduce myself and then I'll let them introduce themselves, but I'm the exec director at Autism Society of Texas. I've been here almost 8 years. I do a lot of our federal public policy and Texas legislative advocacy and work on programming really statewide for autistic adults and kiddos, as well as families. And then Monica and Joe, do you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Diaz. I previously worked with autistic kids as a clinician, and I'm currently working as a coach for autistic adults and a consultant for their caregivers and service providers. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I founded my company, Autistic Freedom, and just really love doing advocacy work. Discovered I was autistic a couple years ago, actually. So it's been a lot of learning and discovering.
Awesome. I'm Joe Carr. I'm autistic and proud. Was not diagnosed as a kid, so I've had to figure out how to integrate autism as an adult. I'm really passionate about helping people harness the gifts of their autism. I started a healthy baby and children's food company with my wife called Serenity Kids. You can see our products back here. We're in our office, and would not have been able to do that without being autistic. The skills I have from being autistic are what led me to this success, as well as a lot of the challenges that I've had to overcome. So I'm really passionate about helping people learn how to mitigate challenges, emphasize their gifts, and create a more autistic inclusive world.
Awesome. Thank you both. And I just wanted to mention, just for everybody watching on Facebook, we have a Google form in the comments or possibly posted with the video. And please, if you have questions for Joe and Monica, we're going to save questions for the end, and I'm going to read them off the Google form. And that way, if it's like a personal question, you don't have to share all your information publicly, and we'll just read the questions anonymously. So all right, here we go. So today we're going to talk about autism and what it is. I think most of us know, but we'll talk about it. We'll move into defining autistic burnout, the causes, recovery and prevention, tips and steps, and questions. And first of all, we're going to just talk about autism kind of an overview. And it's oh my goodness, I'm going to try to, there we go. Nope. Let me see if I can just. Sorry, I'm blocking my own screen here. So autism is lifelong. It's a neurodevelopmental disability, typically appears during early childhood, and often causes global developmental delays in speech, communication, behavior, and gross and fine motor skills. But it looks different in everyone. So, and as y'all know, and you just heard, that we've got lots and lots of people getting diagnosed as adults. So it's not outgrown in adulthood. Some people are just now realizing they have autism. Maybe they were misdiagnosed. We often see like ADHD or bipolar or anxiety disorder. So some combination of those. It's not that autistic adults didn't always have challenges. They just didn't often have the correct diagnosis. And it's becoming, there's been a lot more awareness now. So it's a spectrum condition. It affects people differently and to varying degrees. And everyone's autism experience is really unique. So while Monica and Joe are going to talk about a lot of their own experiences, there's a lot of takeaways that everyone can use, but of course you're going to want to tailor it to either yourself or your child if you're watching for a loved one. There we go. And then what's important to know about autism, the current autism prevalence rate is 1 in 36. That's per the most recent CDC prevalence rate announcement this past spring, and they're counting that by age 8. So it's honestly probably higher because we know that girls are getting diagnosed later, usually in teen years or in adulthood, and we're still seeing a lot of men who got missed as well. So we're seeing a lot of adults get diagnosed. So it's at least 1 in 36. And then there are quite a lot of disparities. So we've seen a significant number of people misdiagnosed or not diagnosed. Males are diagnosed at higher rates than females, and a lot of the diagnostic criteria has been in the past very male based. A long time ago, they thought only boys and men had autism. So That's been a challenge, but definitely everybody's making inroads and awareness there. And then the numbers of individuals, of people of color in communities and Hispanic and Black communities, diagnosis rates have been lower, although that closed a little bit in the last CDC prevalence rate. So it's good to see those people getting the support that they need. And then I'm going to turn this over to Monica and Joe now, and they're going to talk about what autistic burnout is. And they're going to kind of go through these slides.
Great, thanks, Jackie. So let's start with what autistic burnout is. We kind of created this definition based on our own experiences and just other resources, and we've defined it as prolonged, intense physical, mental, or emotional exhaustion. The keyword here being prolonged. It could last weeks or years, depending on the individual, depending on the extent of the burnout. That recovery time is going to look different. And the difference between autistic burnout and other types of burnout is that the causes are specific to the autistic experience. So some of you may have experienced autistic burnout before, maybe once, maybe multiple times. I know I've experienced it multiple times in my life, but it does very much look different, although there are some common components that we'll go over, like the signs and the causes, prevention and recovery strategies that are very similar across autistic people.
Mm-hmm. For me, it looks a lot like grumpiness, negativity, just everything sucks. Things I usually enjoy, I'm not really enjoying. Sometimes I feel tired, like I just want to sleep more. I'm lethargic. I don't want to do anything. Things I usually like to do, I don't want to do. Just want to maybe check out and watch TV or play on my phone. Don't want to, just kind of really ill-motivated. And I think I think autistic burnout, she said, it can last a little longer, like it's a little harder to get out of, and it can be triggered a lot easier than other people. I see my wife, if she burns the candle at both ends for a few weeks, working too hard, right? She might get burned out and need to take a weekend or a 4-day weekend to recover. Was for me, like, it doesn't have to look like that. Like I can look, it can appear that my life is normal. I'm not overworking, but there's a lot of additional stimuli or things that are overwhelming for me. And then it can take, many days or weeks to actually get out of it.
Hold on, y'all. Sorry, it's taking a minute to advance the slide. I don't really know why, but it is. Let's see. There we go. All righty. So this is what autistic burnout looks like, and I'll let them explain.
Yeah, so I'll go over some of the common signs. Again, this may look different for everyone. It might be a combination of things, and it might look different anytime. Let's say someone experiences autistic burnout, recovers, and then a couple of years later goes through another burnout phase. That can also look different, even in the same person. So this can look like Joe mentioned, like lack of motivation, loss of skills, physical symptoms such as getting sick a lot or having digestive issues, more difficulty masking, which kind of goes into seeming more autistic. So more autistic traits and behaviors kind of emerging and showing. Increased difficulty with socializing, exhaustion, difficulty with self-care, it being easier to reach overload, meltdown, or shutdown. This is because, probably the body's just already overloaded. Like Joe mentioned, there's just a lot more coming in. So if you're already kind of burnt out, it's just so much easier to get there. And some people experience a spike of energy followed by a crash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good to understand this list because it could look like other things. Like sometimes I thought I was depressed. I call it depressed, like it's because it would last weeks or months.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be like, I'm depressed, because a lot of these symptoms mimic what you might think of as depression. And so, but understanding, it's not that depression is more of like a permanent state that sometimes needs specific treatment or medication versus this is like a reaction to previous incidents that caused me to be burned out. And now I'm recovering and that there's a pathway back. I think that for some parents, it might also look like a quote regression, like, they were advancing in their skill set and now they're suddenly going backwards or they're more autistic. So it's good for you to remember, what led to that? Maybe that's not that they're regressing, it's that this is a temporary quote regression or they're burned out and they, through some recovery strategies we're going to show in a minute, you can get back to where they were.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to a lot of these having experienced burnout myself, I'm actually in the recovery phase of a 2-year burnout that I didn't realize was burnout. But once I kind of connected to resources that helped explain what burnout was, I was able to use the strategies to recover. But for me, a big one was lots of meltdowns, just way easier to reach overload. I had to take care of myself a lot more, not being able to work, things like that. Okay, so like Joe mentioned, this can look very similar
It's almost
to
like
other.
other.
We've never done this
Yeah.
before. Just kidding there, but yeah, it can look very similar to other experiences. So I also, for a long time, thought I was experiencing depression because that's the only thing that I found that could explain, which, like he said, the signs can look very similar, but the differences are in the causes and the recovery strategies. So sometimes this means that people can get incorrect diagnoses, which leads to ineffective treatment. So if people are getting treatment for depression, that's not really addressing or connecting them with the strategies that are needed to recover from burnout. So like I said, those are the differences. And Joe also mentioned the concept of regression. So having been a clinician that worked a lot with autistic children, this is a term that I heard a lot, was regression, where we see a loss of skills, a loss of motivation. And it appears that the child is regressing in their skills. But what I found was most of the time they were just burnt out, experiencing autistic burnout. And so if you are kind of encountering that situation with a child or just someone that you care for, or that you know that's autistic, the answer might actually be that they're burnt out. All right, so here we have some of the causes of autistic burnout. So we have overload. Overload can occur from many different things, such as sensory overload, emotional overload, demand overload. Changes, good or bad. For me, these kind of are just very similar experiences, whether it's a good or a bad change. Illness, aging, just in general, getting older can lead to a lot of changes in the body. Or
Burned out way easier now than I did 10 years ago. So
right.
It just happens more often.
Poor physical states, such as lack of sleep or poor nutrition. And I think this is a pretty common one, given that a lot of autistic people experience have maybe more restricted food repertoires due to sensory differences, things like that. And then another big one is masking.
Mm-hmm. And like, you know, I have these peak experiences where something's really great or really exciting or takes a lot of energy and I complete it. And there's its own recovery that's needed from that, that if I do it well, does it last very long? It's like, okay, I can take a few hours or maybe a day to recover from maybe a big traveling experience or some kind of thing that happened. But if I don't take that time and then I go right back into my life, I'm more likely to reach burnout. So yeah. They say what goes up must come down. So if I don't come down on purpose, I'll be brought down for a longer period of time, especially if there's a few of those peaks and then I don't recover from each one. Eventually I'm like forced to recover in a longer way.
So maybe like being overextended and not having the appropriate processing time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. So masking. So this is actually a term that helped me discover that I was autistic. I didn't realize that not everyone did this. I think to an extent people do, but not in the way that I found that I did. So I'm really thankful for having learned about the masking experience, which I'm sure a lot, if not all autistic people can relate to. So it's basically learning, practicing, and performing behaviors to fit in, along with hiding or suppressing autistic traits and behaviors. I think the really important thing here is that a lot of autistic people use it as a survival strategy. So it's mainly like a social survival strategy that you use to hide or suppress those autistic traits that maybe you've identified, ostracize you, or, make you look different, or you're having trouble fitting in, or even like pretending to cope with things like sensory input. So this can be really, really draining. I know for me, I've been on a journey of discovering how to unmask and finding those safe spaces to unmask. because I do find that it takes a lot of my energy.
Yeah, I think a lot of different therapy techniques for autistic people often almost encourage masking. It's almost like we're teaching you how to not be autistic, which can be useful for certain circumstances. Like it's not a good thing for autistic people to learn. The trick is teaching it in a way that doesn't say this is the right way, or you're supposed to do this, or you're only good, or you're only ever going to be loved if you hide the fact that you're autistic, rather than like in a job interview or in a certain circumstance, you might want to know how to kind of repress some of these behaviors. But repressing behaviors is exhausting. So plan, you can't do it all the time, or you will end up burned out, and then plan that recovery time. So if I had a job interview, for instance, where I have to really keep it in, I plan not to do anything the rest of that day. Like I need to like come back and just crash from that, because it takes a lot of energy to do it. It's good that I know how, but I can't be expected to do it all the time. And I would never want a kid to learn that not doing it is somehow bad or wrong.
Right. And I think for me, a perspective shift that I've had with masking is seeing it more as a tool. So like Joe said, kind of knowing when to use it and knowing when you're using it too much. It is a tool. It's a tool that a lot of autistic people could benefit from, but it's not necessary, like Joe said, to be accepted or, be comfortable. It should be, the standard should be having the ability and the safety to unmask. There you go. Let's talk a little bit about masking children. Maybe some of you experienced this as when you were kids, or maybe some of you have autistic kids and you want to know what that looks like. It can be a little bit more difficult to identify masking children, just because maybe they're not aware of it themselves. And they just can display a little bit differently than adults, although some of these are very similar to adult experiences. So one big one that I saw working with autistic kids was this really big difference of behaviors, or even just the way that they acted in school versus in school and public settings versus at home. So I would have a lot of parents tell me, hey, they're doing really good at school. They're talking to peers, they're meeting these goals, they're listening to their teachers. But when they get home, it's just a battle. It's they're crying, they're having meltdowns, having them do anything is really difficult. And something that I really saw was that maybe they were masking at school. So like we said, it takes so much energy to mask that maybe when they were at school or at some public setting, when they come home to that safer space, there's going to be an explosion. Like Joe said, if you bottle it in, you have to give that recovery time. So if someone's bottling in and suppressing all day, or trying really hard to figure out how to fit in socially all day, there's going to be a point where that just kind of explodes. And usually that's in a safer setting, like the home setting. Maybe it can be behaviors of peers. So all kids do this, but a difference can be mimicking in a way where the behavior is not transferred to an appropriate context. So maybe there's behaviors that they've seen in other situations, maybe even mimicking inappropriate behaviors, things like that. Relying on scripts for social situations. So the way that I've seen this in kids is just kind of repeating the same scenarios in different social situations, having that same sort of interactions, or there's play scenarios that they play every time, because that's what they know, that's what they can rely on. And another one is appearing confident in social situations, then expressing confusion or frustration or social anxiety. So sometimes what happens is I've seen kids or parents tell me, hey, they really put up a fight going to this location, but once they get there, everything's fine. They're totally good. Sometimes that means that they're just masking there, because if it's not a safe space to not unmask, and maybe the anxiety is coming from, hey, it's too bright in there, it's too loud, I'm nervous about interacting with people, and then once they get there, they kind of don't really have the choice to to mask.
Mhm. I have sort of two masks that I where I have the life of the party mask, where I'm like really outgoing and I'm really funny and kind of charming. And it's fun, but like I'm not having authentic connection, like I'm not really me, like, and so I don't necessarily, and it's exhausting, takes a lot of energy. Or I have sort of the invisible mask. I just sort of shut down all my energy and just kind of hide in the group. And really I'm physically present, but not really able to participate. Also exhausted. It's less exhausting, but it's just really awkward. Like I just am uncomfortable the whole time. Just want to get out of there. So really for me the in between of that, like being my true authentic self, requires me to be with a person or a small group that I feel fully safe with and I know fully accepts me.
And I think that's so important too, to understand how you mask, just being aware of that. Like, what are you masking? How does that present?
Mhm.
Because it's going to be really important to discover when you're in the process of unmasking. A lot of people that I've worked with, they're like, well, I don't even know what I'm masking. So I don't even know where to start. So kind of getting in touch with that, and just a suggestion that I usually make is, who are you at home? Who are you when you're in a safe space? How do you act?
Yeah.
And that can typically lead people to understanding like what their mask looks like.
Yeah, I've done it for so long. It's such a habit that I can do it with my wife, or I can do it with close friends that I am fully safe with. And my whole point of being with them is to get my needs for connection and intimacy met. But if I mask, then I'm really not, right? I'm just sort of blocking that, and then I leave more drained. And it wasn't that, like, so I have to kind of intentionally be vulnerable, be open to being myself, knowing that they trust, trusting that they'll accept me,
Right.
and that takes effort.
Mm-hmm.
It was worth it.
Worth it. It's hard, but worth it sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the recovery and prevention strategies. So these are in the same list because they can work as recovery, so before the burnout occurs, and as prevention. As recovery, so after the burnout started, and then as prevention before it occurs. So the first one would be special interests and hobbies, kind of digging into those things that bring you passion and joy, stimming, having breaks and downtime, consistent routines, setting boundaries, like knowing when to say no, not forcing yourself to do things that may lead to you being overextended. Alone time, this can be very helpful, maybe not for everyone, but I like my alone time. Reduce stressors in the environment or change the environment. And this can also include having your own kind of sensory protective strategies. Like, for instance, I carry my sunglasses everywhere. I have them right here. And I carry my loop earplugs, sometimes my over-the-head noise reducing headphones, and like a synth toy. I'm stimming with a guitar pick right now, just so to kind of help me process my sensory environment. Unmasking, self-care strategies, leave of absence from school or from work, understanding and responding to body signals, and just time. A lot of recovery is just giving yourself time to recover.
Mm-hmm. I like time in nature a lot, going on hikes or going out on a kayak, being in the water. I really like various meditation or spiritual practices, anything where I'm just being still, connecting with myself. Really good food. The more healthy I eat, the more I adhere to the foods that I know my body really likes. Can be really helpful. Exercise, moving my body, being outside, being in the sunshine. And I personally need adrenaline practice. Like, I really like to mountain bike or water ski or snow ski, or different things that like get my blood pumping and get my energy up. Like, I just have a certain amount of intensity that I need as both recovery and prevention to keep me happy.
Nice. Yeah. And I'm assuming it's kind of taking you a long time or it's been a process to discover those. I know for me it has. And one big one for me is understanding and responding to my body signals. So understanding what's going on inside of me so that I can process it, because if I'm not able to, it'll usually lead to overload. So I meditate daily. I use mindfulness practices. I also exercise a lot. I'm a very active person. I love moving. I find that when I move, my body is able to kind of process those things that it needs to. And then a big one for me too has been breaks and downtime, kind of knowing my limits, knowing, hey, I'm going to need a break after this event, and kind of planning ahead for those. And a big thing too is like being okay with that. I think a lot of times people may feel pressured to be at a certain pace. And that's something that I had to unlearn, was to discover my own pace so that I wasn't getting to that burnout point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I perform at a higher level than the average person, and it's been hard for me to accept that I therefore need to rest longer than the average person. And that, I want to just keep performing all the time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure to do that. And so, really having approval for downtime, for rest is hard for me, but essential, or otherwise I can't perform.
Yeah. And I just want to talk a little bit about, these kind of seem like maybe they are like more general recovery strategies. There are some that are very much more specific to the autistic experience, like special interests and hobbies and stimming. So for me, stimming is really important. I really, that's another unmasking strategy that I've had to kind of learn, is being okay with stimming in public and just giving my body what it needs. And also like discovering what types of stimming or body regulation my body responds well to. Like I like to dance in front of the mirror by myself. Like I just like jump around and it feels great. And that's just like, I know that my body needs that. As well as like establishing boundaries has been a good one. Like if I tend to over socialize sometimes, because I just love socializing and getting together with people, but I know that there's a limit to that, and I could kind of start feeling it, and I've learned not to push it. So setting boundaries around that and knowing when to say, hey, maybe I should just not do this thing tonight. So some steps to take. Creating a specific recovery and prevention plan for yourself or for an autistic person that you care for is really, really important, because again, this is an individualized plan. It's going to be very, very specific and different for every individual. So knowing the signs and the causes that are specific to you or the person is really important. So maybe looking through that list. And what I've done in the past is I've kind of made my own document of, okay, these are the signs, these are the causes, these are the strategies that I'm trying out. Using proactive strategies such as planning downtime, taking breaks, and adjusting expectation. This one being a big one that Joe and I have talked about quite a bit, is those breaks and kind of discovering that for yourself and knowing what works for you, and planning those in ahead of time. And then adjust when needed. So people change, situations change. It's okay for your plan to be flexible, and it should be. It should be, the importance is that it's effective. And a big thing for this too, whether this is for you or for someone else, taking data, taking notes of some sort has been really important in my recovery, because that helps me keep track of what's working, what isn't, maybe what some of the causes were. It just really helps me keep track of it all so I can understand it better.
Yeah, my wife and I like to travel, and travel is fun. I like it, and it takes a lot of energy, and she'll often be the one to say, so what's when we're planning the vacation, to plan the recovery from the vacation has been like a key thing to do, because we'd get back on like a Sunday night from the vacation and then go back to work Monday morning, and it was a mess. Like it was a disaster. Now I'm like working in burnout, which just extends the burnout. I'll lose a whole week doing that. Versus if I could just take a day or half a day, or we plan to get back on Saturday so that we have Sunday off to recover, or, plan to take Monday off also, or a morning off. And then actually plan on what I'm going to do with it, because I can spend it recovering, or I can just sort of like check my email and watch TV and like not really fully recover. So, I always try to plan nature time. That's like my go-to, is like, okay, get to nature like go on a hike. We live in Austin, and it was really helpful. There's lots of nature. So but whatever it is, plan a bike ride, do some exercise, make sure you have good food to eat. So you don't just eat the sort of junk food that's left because the fridge is empty, so like planning that ahead of time can really make the recovery quicker ultimately, so I can get back to my life.
Yeah. And, a big thing that I want to mention too is ultimately this kind of comes down to prioritizing taking care of yourself and knowing, hey, my needs are valid. My needs are important. This is what's going to help me as a person be at my best and help me prevent getting to those places that are really, really difficult. So kind of prioritizing, that's something that I've had to do, is like prioritize myself, prioritize my needs, and just really understand like, no, this is actually really important. I'm really important. I am valuable and my needs are valid. So some steps to take. So this one, I think these bullet points are mainly geared towards parents or caregivers, but we'll talk about kind of both experiences. So using opportunities to learn and practice skills such as self-advocacy. So this is a skill that I've had to work on a lot. Again, like with setting those boundaries or communicating when I need to get my needs met. This is just a really important skill. And as a caregiver, I really encourage people to promote that skill because it's a really lifelong skill. So if you start learning it as a kid, that's going to be a skill that's going to just really help you throughout your whole life. Really, it's just a necessary human skill. So self-advocacy, learning to request breaks, learning to say, hey, I'm overwhelmed, things like that, really important. And on the flip side of that, if you are a caregiver, respecting those requests and teaching kids, hey, when you communicate your needs, they will be met. Another, I think Joe was going to talk about this actually.
Oh, mindfulness. I'll talk about mindfulness. It looks so many different ways. I mean, mindfulness really just means I'm in the present moment. I'm paying attention fully, attempting to pay attention to, what's going on. So this can look as traditional as sitting meditation, where you're just sitting still and close your eyes and focusing on your breath. Or it can be riding a bike or taking a walk or cooking or doing any task where the goal is to be present in the body.
Yeah, and for me, a big way, a way that looks is connecting with my body, like understanding what emotion I'm feeling, what state I'm in, just really understanding my body. And that really helps me, maybe when I'm dealing with overload or anxiety, it really helps me move through that, just to kind of understand what's going on and just allowing that to be there and knowing like, hey, I'm going to work through this. I'm going to get my needs met somehow.
Yeah. And I don't know if y'all can see me, but I could talk a little bit about, can you guys see me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm not sure if I'm on the screen, but I can talk a little bit about parental strategies as well. And of course, the biggest thing is kind of understand what is going on with your kiddo and be supportive. And so everything that Joe and Monica have said, they're great panelists because they're so able to articulate all of this and what it feels like and how they get, overwhelmed or exhausted, even though both of them do like amazing work, they still need downtime. And I think it's really, really important to understand that for your kiddos and also to try to even teach those skills as they're getting older, whether they're teens or they're little, just to be like, hey, you need some downtime, you need a brain break, like what can we do after school to chill out, like those kind of things. So don't, we sometimes see parents being like, well, you got to do your homework before you start any, fun activities. But I would, really suggest maximum downtime. Let people unwind, let your kiddos unwind and chill. And, if you really are struggling with that stuff and your kid is too overwhelmed after school, that might be something that you advocate for in an IEP, is to like cut homework or reduce homework or have the ability to say, no, we can't do this. And so I think there's a lot you can build in to try to teach your kiddos a lot of these strategies as they grow. It really is important to plan with all these things in mind, like your vacation, your downtime, what does your kid need? So I think great advice from Joe and Monica. So thanks, you guys. Anything else on this slide? Otherwise, I'll go ahead and attempt to advance it. Okay. All right, let's move on. So then after this, oh, you know what? It's actually time for questions already.
Love it.
Yes. So we're doing great on time. And we have a Google form. Don't have a ton of questions. So we have a Google form. If anybody who's watching on Facebook wants to type in a question right now, then they can do that. And I'm going to read them out to Joe and Monica. And as of now, we just have one question. And it says, my son has interests that I do not share, such as art. Would it be beneficial to put him in art classes or kind of try to find an art mentor? Or should I just let him do it on his own because he doesn't really do well with socializing? And this is a 9-year-old kiddo. So I think they would like to hear y'all's feedback on that. And then I can maybe chime in too.
That's great. I think it's all trial and error. So if he's perfectly happy just doing it on his own, no reason to mess with that, right? Like you don't feel like the need to micromanage it. Other options are like YouTube videos or online art classes so that he can sort of do it at his own pace. Like I'll watch this sort of Bob Ross, whatever art thing and like imitate it. But try a class, see if he likes it, do more. But if he doesn't, be prepared for him to not go again, like go a day or two, try it out, but don't be surprised if he doesn't want to finish it, so it's all trial and error ultimately.
Yeah, I agree. And I think those are really good ideas. And ultimately, it's about what he wants to do, right? And what, if you're seeing that art is beneficial to his life and really enjoys it, then great. You could expand on that or not. It's just always great to give options. If you just want to talk these things out or, give different options, that's a really good idea. And something that I've worked on a lot with, especially caregivers, is, I remember some caregivers saying like, oh, when I was a kid, I was socializing a lot and, and I'm afraid I'm not giving them those opportunities. And I think that's really good to be mindful of, but it's also great to be aware that needs are different and everyone has different needs for alone time versus socialization. So if they're happy, they're happy. If he's happy doing art and you want to give him additional options, then great. But I would just really encourage you to continue making that a safe space for him.
Let him lead.
Right.
Yeah, that's good advice, you guys. And I would also say anyone that has a special interest, if it is something you can encourage, like, first of all, if you don't know anything about art, for example, I do think it's a good idea to encourage any kind of special interest, because a lot of those things can really lead to employment and being happily employed because you're doing something you like. And so I think when you do have a skill or you're showing that, and of course it can also be a hobby that could turn out to be a downtime hobby when they're older as well. So, I mean, I think anything you can do to encourage that. And of course, art classes might be a good option. They're going to meet people with similar interests. It hopefully is going to be sort of a quiet environment. So that's probably a good thing to try a class. But again, if it's not going well, I wouldn't let it ruin the art. And so, then like Joe said, YouTube or private lessons or something like that. But I think it's a good thing to encourage for sure. And that goes really for any special interest like that. And then I got more comments that are coming in. Well, sorry, I've got comments coming in multiple formats right now. So let me just take another one. And so this one says, I and my son definitely need breaks and downtime, but it's really hard because my spouse has a big family and they are over a lot. So like with many nieces and nephews, so like around 10 or 11 nieces and nephews. And so how can you find downtime when you've got external family kind of expecting a lot of you? Do you guys have suggestions for managing that?
That's a tough one. Jackie, why don't you go ahead and stop the share somewhere big here, since we're
Yeah, sure. Okay.
My wife is more sensitive to this than me, and her boundary setting with this is actually uncomfortable sometimes, but also like a model for me. We have a pretty big family. They always want to stay with us. They always want to come, and she just tells me no. She's just like, no, they can't stay with us. Like, they can visit if they want, but they can't stay in our house. And like, it's just like blows my mind. I'm like, but they're family. They have to be able to stay with us. but it's like, that's like her, she knows it's like too much for her. So I think the biggest message there is like really uncomfortable boundary setting, really like being willing to say, no, you can't come, or no, we need to leave, or we need to have a room that's off limits. That's like, this is the space, or, just kind of planning it in, like planning for the overwhelm. And being okay with them not understanding it or them not liking it. Most of the time they totally get it. They're like, I totally get it. You have a kid, you're a busy life, don't want to put you out, right? Like they don't want to actually violate us. So I'm always uncomfortable telling them no, and they always take it really well. So, but they might not always. You're depending on your family, they might get offended or argue with you or not understand. And you just have to like accept that. I think that's just part of boundary setting, is being prepared for people to not like the boundary, especially if it's a new boundary. If they're not used to you doing this, the first couple of times they might argue with you. But as soon as like you've set this boundary regularly, it just becomes normal. Like they're just like, oh, they need to have their quiet time. Oh, that's the room that they have for quiet, or oh, this is the day we don't come over, whatever boundary it is you set. The first couple of times it's always really uncomfortable, and then it becomes normalized and easier to do.
Great. Yeah, I agree with everything Joe said. And I want to highlight a portion of what he said, which is a safe space. Communicating like, hey, this room's off limits, and that being the space that you as a parent and the kid can go to, knowing, hey, this is a place where, I'm safe and I don't have to interact, or there's not as much sensory input. Maybe having some kind of recovery stuff in there too, like, maybe some favorite music or some activities or things like that can kind of help with that regulation.
Yeah, you could preempt it, like have a lot of recovery and prevention right before they come over, and plan recovery afterwards, right? So kind of bookend it to be a little especially ready, and just don't try to have one of those happen right after another experience, or like right before something that is going to be hard.
Yeah, those are good. We also got a comment on Facebook, and I was thinking of a couple of things too. But first of all, somebody said, we plan events with a start and end time. That seems to help everyone, so everyone's needs are met. And there's also no or open door policy. So that's something you could set up. Don't just stop by. And another thing, I don't know, sometimes, it's easier also to explain why you're doing this. Like, what are your child's issues, or what are your issues as an autistic adult? Why can't you have like nonstop visitors with 10 people at your house, and explain how that works mentally? And like, maybe it's as the invisible disability. A lot of times the families aren't understanding autism, and maybe they just think you're being difficult. And so sometimes I think explaining how it impacts your child or yourself, I think that might also help too, like either in an email, or like, here's how this affects us, and this is why we're asking these things, like, and then if they're going to be weird, then come down with the hammer on the boundaries. So okay. And then another, let's see, hold on, I've got quite a few questions here. Okay, so somebody also said, okay, so this is a new question. It says, when my 12-year-old gets overwhelmed and angry in a situation, he will not leave the situation. He just says it's too much and screams and bites himself. I've told him he can go to another room. How do I help him? And I know, Monica, you might be good with this, because I know we've learned a lot of therapy skills for self-regulation and coping skills, and also, of course, preparation before you go to that activity. You don't want to wait, but you go ahead and see what you would advise here too, since you've worked with a lot of kiddos.
Yeah, that's a really tough one. It's especially tough when you're trying to navigate that with them when they're already in an escalated state and already in a state of overwhelm. It could just be really tough to address it then. Some strategies that I've suggested before, it sounds like you are talking about these things proactively, but maybe like reducing the effort needed to get them where they need to be. So this can look a lot of different ways. So working on different skills could be a good one, like self-regulation. That can look a lot of different ways. But what I'm trying to say is reducing the effort. So maybe if there's like a safe space for them to go to, is there like a way to bring a safe space to them? Something that I've suggested is like these little tents. I love these little tents for kids that I work with, because those you can just, they weigh like 0.5 pounds. You could just pick them up. Hey, boom, they're in the tent, they're in their safe space, things like that. Thinking of ways to reduce it, because if you think about, they're already in overwhelm, so adding additional demands it's gonna like decrease that chance of them being able to actually do it. So kind of thinking too of like, hey, proactively just being aware of like, well, what are common triggers, what are common causes, and then starting to address those before overwhelm occurs. So, hey, if you know that a common trigger is like, you know, when a car outside, like alarm goes off or something like that, and you're in a place where there's like cars around, it's just an example, but already encouraging the use of those self-regulation strategies. So whether that's using protective sensory items, or using like regulation strategies that they learned, like taking deep breaths or co-regulating, things like that. But just in general, like reducing that effort for them. And that can look so many different ways and just so different for each kid.
Yeah, one of those tents.
Yeah, I love them. They're great.
For me.
I like
Yeah.
that idea.
You know,
Yeah,
talking
but I
about it
think,
out,
go ahead, Joe.
I think, you know, talking about it outside the situation, you know, asking them later, like, what could I have done? Is there anything that we could plan for next time? Sort of get his permission to use certain words or do certain strategies could be helpful, even if they don't work, at least like they were agreed upon. You talk about it again later. And then if it's also being mindful of what it might actually be working for him, but just doesn't look great to you, like biting himself as an example. Like if he's not drawing blood, if he's not hurting himself, maybe sitting there and biting himself is okay, you know, like whatever, having some approval that if he wants to stay there and express his situation, you know, you can play linebacker and just explain to everyone else that he's fine and to give him some space.
Yeah. And I think also, like Monica said too, like I like the idea of bringing the calm down tools to them. So the tent, or I was thinking a weighted blanket or headphones, as long as you're like kind of offering those sensory things. And then I think it is important if you have a kiddo in therapy, whether it's OT or speech or ABA or whatever it is, that they're also working with them on like being prepared. What can they do? Kind of empower them with their own strategies. Like as they're getting, it's really hard with little kids, but as you're getting older, to teach those strategies, like things are going to go wrong. Like a fire alarm's going to go off, or someone's going to have a barking dog and you hate dogs. Or, I mean, things are definitely going to happen. And it's really great if you can equip your kids with some coping strategies, and whether it's their headphone, whatever it is, whatever works for them, it's really good to kind of work with a therapist on some of those skills, I think, because those situations always, there's no way to avoid that. However much you pre-plan, sometimes things go wrong or something weird happens, you know, that's going to set your kiddo off. So I think trying to work on their skill building is really helpful. Okay, we're actually gonna get a lot of like a lot of comments and questions here. Okay, so that's good. And then let me take a look. Oh, so somebody, let's see. Oh, somebody said, great info about recovery. Thank y'all. Y'all are awesome. That's great. Thank you. This is a lot of good information from Joe and Monica. And I had another really good comment and I can't find it now. Oh, somebody commented, I just wanted to read it out to you guys. They pointed out that the goal of recovery is not to get back to before and not really to get back to normal, because you then will get burnout. You'll get burned out again quickly. So you have to really change your whole life and live as the authentic autistic self that you are. And acknowledging that is key. So
yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Whoever said that, thank you. That's really great to hear.
Yeah.
And to add on to that, just understanding that it's a process, you know, and just kind of like, it's a process of like constantly meeting yourself where you need to be met. So that it can look very different, but yeah, the goal in itself is just getting better slowly.
Yeah, they say one of the defining traits of autism is like extreme talents. Like we're really, really good at some things and really, really bad at others. We're not necessarily better overall than the average person. We're just, or worse than overall. We just have more extremes. I think I'm seeing a lot of parallels between that and also the way I perform, that like when I'm performing, like when I'm in my optimal state, I'm contributing a lot and there's a lot of productivity or output or creativity. But then that recovery is just as deep, like I have to recover longer or harder, you know, like, and so I am always trying to get back up to this optimal state, but I can't possibly live in that
Right.
optimal flow state all the time, like nobody could. And so it's like, that's the riding the waves of it is ultimately the art form. And sometimes, you'll have longer terms of productivity and longer periods of down, but ultimately plan for longer down, because we, in addition to performing and the energy that takes, we're also bombarded by a very loud world where dealing with traumas from being rejected and all the people's weird emotions and energies and negativity that's being shown at us. We're being asked to mask and all these different scenarios. So there's all this stuff being asked of us that requires more recovery, in addition to just our normal desire to create and produce or work.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, we got another question, and this is actually about remote work. And it says the acceptance of remote work has been a huge benefit for many of us. However, my family struggles with new employers not understanding our challenges, i.e. overpromising and missing deadlines, which have led to job losses despite over average abilities. What resources are available to educate employers about the positive aspects of autistic employees, but also engage tactics that allow both sides to succeed? So employment related questions. Do you guys have suggestions? We have a few resources, but what do you guys suggest?
I can't think of what organization this is off the top of my head, but it might be Autism Society, but there's a resource specifically for employers to understand. It's like the employees handbook for autistic something, but that's one that I've gone through and actually looked into to learning how to communicate my needs, and then also encouraged other people to give to their employers so they can learn about autism and autistic needs in the workplace. So if I remember it, when I remember it, maybe Jackie, you could post it somewhere or something. I'm sure we'll have like a list of resources. But yeah, that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, as an employer, right, I have 28 employees. So for me, the greatest resource is you, like you explaining what you need, whether you call it autism or not. It can be helpful to say it's because of autism, but it doesn't have to be. So for me, I have a very individualized approach with each of my staff around what the needs are for their job and what the deliverables are, what their challenges are, and how I can support them. And that's what I believe all bosses should do. And so that's the kind of boss you want. That's the kind of company you want to work for, that values your output and your creativity and your specific skill set, and also is willing to accommodate whatever additional challenges that requires. Helping them understand it's because of autism can be helpful. Sometimes it can feel or sound like an excuse. So, like there's also legal implications, like if you do help them understand that your limitations because of autism, there's some rules against firing you for that. Right. So those are some protections, though you probably don't want to work for some place that you have to threaten to sue them to not get fired. Like that's just not a great vibe. So ultimately, I've had a lot of jobs. I've been fired from a lot of jobs. I quit a lot of jobs. It's just one of those things. And ultimately, I had to start my own company to be fully comfortable in the workplace. So it's one of those things that's going to be harder as an autistic person, but the more vocal you are, the more you are self-advocating, asking for what you want, and the more in approval you are of your gifts. If you are really comfortable talking regularly about how much value you add, right? That helps them realize, oh, like, okay, you missed a deadline, or you're coming late, or whatever. This isn't a traditional employee boss relationship, but your output is actually extraordinary. So I'm going to make some exceptions because it's worth it. But you have to be in approval of talking about your value, but also you have to ask for the accommodation with so much approval for it that you're not feeling guilty or shameful for asking for this. That makes it easier for them to be like, sure, you can have that. Like I don't have to manage your guilt or make it seem like somehow you think you're asking for more than you deserve.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Joe. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to go off of that a little bit. Is that self-advocacy. Super important. And it's a skill. It's a skill that needs to be practiced and developed and just over time with enough experience. It's important. It's important. Like I said before, it's really important to value yourself and validate your needs, because that is just in general in the world for a lot of autistic people, that's not the case. needs aren't validated.
Yeah.
So that's something that you kind of have to develop yourself. And like Joe said, like, hey, I don't want to work for an employer that's like, well, your needs are too much. I don't want anyone in my life to tell me that, because if they do, it's like, well, you don't value me, but I value myself. And so that self-advocacy component and developing that confidence to know, hey, I need this to be successful. I know this is what I need. And it is up to the employer. It's their job as the employer to say, okay, I will meet you with your needs. Unfortunately, that's really not the case for a lot of people. I think that's a big reason why employment is so difficult for autistic people. I've been fired before too, and I felt totally gutted, because even though I tried to communicate my needs, I wasn't really supported. And it was really hard. It's really hard to be fired when you're trying. And then people just don't understand how to support you. So yeah, just continuing to develop that skill, very important.
Yeah, every time I was fired, I got a better job. So there's no time that I was fired that it wasn't an upgrade in my employment history.
Nice.
So like, it's always sucks in the moment, right? But looking back, it's like, thank God they fired me. I was so unhappy there,
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe it's not a good fit, or it's certainly a learning experience. I think if you do get fired from jobs, and we hear from autistic adults a lot, sometimes that's the first time they contact us, like, hey, I'm autistic and I got fired, or things are going really badly at my job. And, I think that's a learning experience. Like, is this even working for you? Like, is this a good environment? Is this a good job? I mean, it may be, and you may be working with jerks. So that's a real possibility. But, you are entitled to accommodations. I'll get Monica's resource, but Autism Society of America has a lot of employment resources for employers. And Adriana from our team just shared that in the Facebook chat. And then we also posted a link from Disability Rights Texas. So if you're ever really discriminated against, like, Disability Rights Texas is a great agency to go to. But they also have really helpful articles about asking for accommodations in the workplace. What are reasonable accommodations that you can include? And then how to submit your requests, and even like a little tool. There's a workplace accommodation request tool, and how to create your request letter link. So there's a lot of great information on that. And we posted that in the chat. So you definitely want to be advocating for yourself, making sure the job's a good fit. A lot of accommodations are not hard. You're not being unreasonable asking to wear headphones, or asking for a quiet desk, or a lot, your schedule. There's just a lot of accommodations that aren't hard for employers to make. And so, I would take a look at like what your rights are. It's also helpful to disclose your diagnosis to Human Resources, because then you are protected. It's actually the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act today. We're going to yay. So you have workplace protection. You do have some workplace protections, but if they don't know you have a disability, the protections aren't quite as robust. So it is also, so you may want to read more. That could be a whole nother topic, and maybe it should be.
Always best to try to work it out with your boss. And if that's not working, going to HR or going to your boss's boss. Like, I really appreciate when my junior staff go around their boss to come and tell me about a problem they're having with their manager, because I want to know about that. I want to support that person. It's usually a miscommunication. It's usually some kind of systems problem. It's rarely because their manager was trying to disempower them, so it's just like, it can be really uncomfortable to do that. But if you think you might be fired if you don't, better to piss off your boss by going to his or her boss than just letting yourself be fired.
Yeah, and one more thing I want to add, it could be important to finding the way of communicating that works best for you. Like, for some people, in-person, face-to-face meetings can be really overwhelming. So maybe like writing some of these things out, writing some accommodations or maybe some needs, and using that to communicate as well can be helpful, because for a lot of people, it can be a very difficult conversation to have and to get started.
Yeah. Definitely. And then I've got one more question. Let me see if I can pull it up. So
I'm also quite terrified of being sued, by the way. All bosses and employers are like really afraid of being sued. So just so you know, you have a lot of power disclosing the diagnosis and talking about this be related to autism. Like it's almost like a get out of firing free card. It's like for us, like we will be very, very careful about how we approach somebody who's of a protected class. So don't underestimate that.
Good advice, Joe. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, and then I think this will probably be our last question. It says, could you address school refusal and its tie into burnout? So I know a lot of that is anxiety based, but I'm sure for autistic kiddos, it could come into play as school refusal. Monica, what do you think about that?
What is
Yeah, so to clarify, does that mean like refusing to go to school?
I do know. So yeah, so I like have a lot of experience with anxiety and OCD and all those sort of disorders, but generally a lot of it is anxiety based, and eventually the kiddos just shut down and like completely
refuse to go to school?
refuse
Okay,
to
that's
go to
what's happening.
school. And so
Okay.
yeah, and so you get to the point where you're either dragging them or bribing them or whatever it is, or you're just letting them stay home. And for some kiddos, it just a lot of times the more they refuse, the more they're not going to go back to. So it sort of is a challenging situation because you don't want to push them over their breaking point. But I know that some kiddos have worked with anxiety professionals, specifically like that. I don't know if y'all are like exposure response prevention. I think, Monica, you probably know about some of that therapy too, but I've heard of that being worked on, and then just working on their anxiety levels, because I think it's largely caused from anxiety, but also is probably contributing to burnout. I would imagine there's probably a reason they don't want to go. So I would also think what is going on at school. Do they need more breaks? Do they need more accommodations? Is the school day too long? Are they being like really high demands of their attention and their movement? Like, I think I would dig deeper about why the school refusal is happening personally, and work with a therapist on anxiety. Monica, what do you think? I know you've worked with a lot of kiddos. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on school refusal and tie to burnout?
Yeah, I agree with what you said, especially the part of like figuring out what's going on in the school. That's something that I've worked a lot on, especially advocating for the kids I worked with in the school setting. What I found was it was really important to kind of get to the root, because there must be a reason or reasons why this is occurring. So it's a two-part kind of approach, like you said, Jackie. So working on those regulation strategies, working on reducing that anxiety, but that's also going to take modifications, whether it's in their environment or like the schedule in the school. So really getting in there, maybe like really getting a hold of like, hey, what is the schedule at school? Where are we seeing those difficult moments come up? And addressing those individually and seeing it's kind of like a cause and effect thing, seeing, okay, as we work on these things, are we seeing the anxiety go down? As we work on also those skill development, are we seeing the anxiety go down? So I would really encourage just getting in there and trying to find the root of it in the school.
Yeah, absolutely. That made me think too, like parents, if they have an IEP or whether they don't, that would be a good reason to ask for one. And then when you do get your child back in school, if that behavior starts increasing and you're starting having problems, if they can actually do like a behavior assessment at school, because sometimes when they do those, they're like, you see this kid was forced to do like sit for 3 hours straight, perform, do all these things. And then they have a meltdown and it's like, oh, surprise, like, so you can see like what led up to sort of a meltdown or a really uncomfortable situation for your kiddo that's causing them not to want to go to school. So if you can do therapy, get them back in, and then work to provide support at school and decrease stress levels, I think that'll help. And then somebody just commented, and I think we probably need to do a whole nother topic on employment and accommodations. But somebody just mentioned that in Texas, employers can fire you for any reason. So I know we're higher and higher state. Yeah, but I mean, because the Americans with Disability Act is federal, I do think you have some protections as a person.
That's right. They can fire you for any reason except for discrimination for members of a protected class. So that's race, religion, disability, gender, and age for people over 40. And so those members of protected class, if you can make an argument that the reason you were fired was because of discrimination, according to the protected class, with disability being a very big one and one that's sometimes a little easier to prove, you almost don't even have to prove it. If you believe that that's the case and you tell HR that, or you say that to your boss, like I said, they're going to be very hesitant to fire you, and it would be pretty easy to get a lawyer to sue them for that. And, and then they'll settle out of court, and the lawyer will get paid from the settlement, and you'll get cash. And it's, it's not fun to sue your employer. It's a lot harder to get a job in that field if you can't use them as a reference. But it's happened to us multiple, even as a really good employer, we have been threatened with that or had that situation, because it's a lot more common than you think, but employers know how common it is. So in Texas, they cannot fire you for a refusal to accommodate disability.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And we just found some other information on the U.S. Department of Labor. So of course, this is federal, but there are conditions where employers can fire workers with disabilities, but the termination has to be unrelated to the disability, or the employee does not meet legitimate requirements for the job, such as performance or production standards, with or without a reasonable accommodation, or because of the employee's disability, he or she poses a direct threat or to health or safety in the workplace. So there's some very specific parameters where people with disabilities could be fired. So they would have to meet one of those per the U.S. Department of Labor's website. So,
but the burden of proof will really end up being on the employer to say that it wasn't. And it'll sort of feel like the burden of proof is on you. But really, when you get into the situation with a lawyer and a lawsuit, like the stress of a lawsuit, the public shame of an employer being sued is so great that like just the threat to do it, or even just the demand letter from the lawyer, will often get a settlement, or in this case, hopefully prevent you from being fired, because they know that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, that is actually the end of our questions. Do you guys have, Monica and Joe, do you have any thing that you guys wanted to review, or just like last thoughts? And I'm going to go back and just throw up what we our little Autism Society of Texas slide at the end here. But any other words of wisdom or comments from you guys?
We have our baby food products, our great pureed meats and veggies. If you have a picky eater or someone who likes softer pureed foods, our foods are the best. They're all allergen free and super well sourced. So we're called Serenity Kids. If you want to check out our Serenity Kids baby food, toddler food.
Yeah, and if you're interested in additional support, so if you're an autistic adult or teen looking for coaching, or you're a caregiver that just needs some support with, understanding and supporting your autistic person better, or even if you're like a therapy company or that needs like someone who has professional and lived experience, reach out to me, autisticfreedom.com. Or you can email me at monica@autisticfreedom.com, and I would love to connect in any way that you need.
Great, thank you both. And yeah, and we're happy if anybody contacts us, you can message us through Facebook or support at this email here, info@Texas Autism Society. We can connect you with them or give you more information. And we just wanted to kind of review a little bit about how we help. So we do have a Navigating Autism program, which is free individualized guidance for autistic adults and families. And then we've got connection groups around the state, some online, some in person. We have recreation groups. Those are we actually have them in person, but we also have an online one for autistic adults too. So if you're anywhere in Texas, we have like a fun theme every month, and we'll kind of discuss that. We do education events like this one. We have the AUTonomy series as well. And this series is a little more geared to autistic adults and teens. Although obviously there's a lot of takeaways. If you're a parent, you can work these things in and be knowledgeable as you're raising your kiddo. We do a lot of legislative advocacy, as I mentioned, and then we actually have done some training in the past for inclusive hiring, making workplaces sensory friendly, being accommodating and welcoming of autistic people and neurodiverse people, and so we actually do a little bit of that as well. So I think that's it. So I think we are done for the day. And Monica and Joe, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise, because you're so helpful. And I know it's helpful for everyone watching. We're getting a lot of great feedback that this has been really great. They've loved all your suggestions. And so we really appreciate it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I think we're going to wrap up our presentation. So let's see. All right. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Bye.